Good afternoon or good morning if you're joining us from the West Coast. This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and I want to welcome you to part 3 of the Gravel Roads training course. It's Gravel Roads Design and Maintenance, and I am so honored to have my colleague Bruce Drews, who was the former head of the Idaho LTAP Center, as your presenter for today. Bruce has a tremendous amount of expertise and knowledge, as those of you who've been on this webinar series the last 2 sessions probably already know. So I'm not going to belabor the point right now. I'll let him give you a little bit of his background when I turn things over to him. But a couple housekeeping items first before we get rolling here. And I see a couple of you have already started to do this. If you wouldn't mind, if you would please find the question box and on the GoToWebinar panel, and if you could please put a hi, hello, good morning, good afternoon in there, a howdy. I got a howdy, that's awesome. So what I'd like to do is just make sure you know where that's at, because that's how we're going to accept questions today. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. I even got a good day in there. That's pretty good. All right. The other thing I want to mention is in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel, we do have for you a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation. I know I still owe you last Thursday's if you were on there. So look for your email, hopefully later this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. Oh, I see Simon's on. Hi, Simon. I hope things are going well for you up in Alaska. He used to be here as a part of our Federal Highway Division office in Ohio. Sorry, getting back to the handout section, we have a PDF for you in there called Online Grading. That's the copy of today's slides. I also uploaded a few other webinar announcements in case you're interested, things we have coming up. This Friday is our ethics replay. So if you weren't able to join the last time when we maxed the software out with 500 participants, know that we're going to do a replay this Friday if you still need to get your CPDs. We will be providing certificates. You just will have to watch and unfortunately not actually answer the questions in the Jeopardy game, but it's still going to provide you the credits. So if you're interested, that's in there. I've also uploaded a few new ones that we have announced. Our Acquisition 104 course. This is part of our Real Estate Academy, and we're happy to have you join us for that if you're interested. We also have Mark Doctor from Federal Highway, who has agreed to do a webinar for us on restricted crossing U-turn intersections. This is the R-cuts or the J-cuts. And then last but not least, we have a webinar we just announced yesterday on tort liability and risk management for local public agencies. And Ron Eck, who's the former director of the West Virginia LTAP Center, will be providing that webinar in August. So if you're interested in any of those, the information's there. And I believe I've had a lot of folks say hi or hello in the box. Hi, Stu. We've got Stu from Vermont on here. So I think we're good to go, Bruce. I think I'm ready to turn this all over to you.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. I really appreciate it. And welcome from Bruce. I'm located here in Boise, Idaho. A little bit of background of myself. I've been in the transportation industry for quite a number of years. I spent almost 19 years with the Idaho Transportation Department, about 13 years with the Idaho T2 Center. I retired in 2013, and I've been very fortunate, and since 2013, I've been in all 50 states of the United States, plus a couple of territories. So it's been a really exciting adventure for myself. The other person I need to take and acknowledge as far as this presentation is concerned is a gentleman by the name of David Jones. I introduced him in both the other 2 sessions, so you've probably heard this before, but he's at the University of California Pavement Research Center. They're at Davis, but his real passion is unpaved roadways. This course that we're going through today, of course, is going to be my 3rd of the 4-part series, and today we're going to be talking primarily about grading gravel roads. But on Thursday, I actually had a question from one of the attendees asking me about this aggregate classification map of the United States, showing kind of the hardness values for a lot of the aggregates around the United States. And it's pretty simple to get. There's a number of different styles and designs, and you can actually get the classification map for all over the world if that's what you so desire. But if you just go into your web browser, go into the web search box and type in actually aggregate hardness map, and it will give me a number of different styles of this map showing aggregate hardness. And of course, the primary purpose of this map is to take a look at kind of the different states, how hard a rock, what type of rock, you might be having to deal with. And of course, we discussed this map pretty extensively on Thursday, but I wanted to let you know how to get to it. So primarily what we're going to be talking about today is grading of unpaved roadways. We're going to talk about grading. Of course, I've got a video that will kind of walk you through some grading methods, and we'll talk about some of the other needs that you may need to think about when you're getting ready to grade a gravel roadway. We're going to talk a lot about moisture, making sure that you have moisture present in your gravel roadway before you come in and do some major grading of any type. Also, the need for some compaction for that gravel roadway. We'll also talk about the manual of uniform traffic control devices and the need for signage, and what type of activity may you need to look at signage whenever you're out there working on that gravel roadway. So those are kind of the three primary items, or four primary items that we're going to talk about today. So what I'd like to do right now is go in and show you a little video that I've got here on grading. The author of this activity, or this movie, is of course Ken Scorseth. He used to be the director for the South Dakota LTAP Center, and you'll recognize him from the video that I had last week as well. So let's go ahead and start that video.
I have tremendous respect for skilled motor grader operators who can do a good job of shaping a gravel road. Chances are you'll never have a set of plans or stakes to guide you. It is just your skill to use the levers and operate the machine which produces correct shape. It's a tricky combination of art and science. And gravel roads will go out of shape quickly, sometimes in as little as a week, or sometimes under heavy traffic in as little as a day. It is a tremendous challenge to do a good job of gravel road maintenance. In this section, we'll cover the most important aspects of using your motor grader to shape a gravel road. The first thing we need to cover is safety, for the operator and for the motoring public. Whenever you're on the road, be sure your warning light is flashing. It's your primary warning to the traveling public. Here's another thing you're required to have: a slow-moving vehicle sign on the rear of your motor grader. Red flags in the sockets at the ends of your moldboard are a good idea too. Also, keep in mind that while using your motor grader, you're a mobile work zone. That means you need to mark the work zone in an approved way. Wear your safety vest, because at times you'll be out of your motor grader walking on the road. Unless the road is closed to traffic, don't leave the work site with windrows on the road. I really can't emphasize safety enough. Be sure to follow all of your agency's rules. The biggest job you will have to do with your motor grader is reshaping the roadway in the spring. Spring is generally the best time because you have less vegetation on the shoulder to deal with, and there is generally more moisture in the gravel, which makes it easier to work, and it will be dust-free. To effectively blend the gravel and reshape the roadway, your motor grader's moldboard has to be in good condition. If the cutting edge is worn in the middle like this, which happens naturally from use, you'll never be able to shape the roadway correctly. So be sure to check the moldboard before you leave the shop. Also, before you leave the shop, be sure to do a thorough service inspection, including checking the tire pressure. Your tires need to be correctly inflated for your motor grader to run smooth and stable. Out on the job, you need to go slow, 3 to 5 miles per hour. Running too fast will cause the machine to lope or bounce, and that will cause washboarding. I'll show you more about washboarding in a few minutes. Reshaping a roadway involves two basic operations: restoring the crown on the roadway and recovering excess material that is accumulated on the shoulders. But you usually perform both of these tasks at the same time. When reshaping the road, the orientation of your moldboard to the road surface is critical. First, you need the correct angle, somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees. Too little angle will allow material to spill from the leading edge of the moldboard, called the toe. Too much angle, and you won't be able to blend and move the material properly. You also have to adjust the pitch, or tilt, of your moldboard. If it's pitched back too far, like this, material will build up in front of the moldboard instead of what you want, which is material moving down and discharging at the heel or trailing end of the blade. And if the moldboard is pitched too far forward, the material doesn't roll across the face of the blade and won't mix. Also, this pitch doesn't allow the blade to cut into a hard surface, so you won't be able to trim out little depressions to reshape the road. The blade will just skip along the surface with no real benefit. The pitch you want depends on what you need to do. To cut in and reshape the surface, you want the moldboard like this. To smooth a road, you want the cutting edge almost at a right angle to the surface, like this. And to spread material, you want the blade somewhere in between those extremes. To be sure you're getting the right crown, keep an eye on your slope meter, or crown gauge. Remember, you want at or near 4%. While reshaping the road, be sure to take advantage of your motor grader's articulation feature. In other words, the hinge in the middle, which can improve your stability, and it allows you to gain more angle on the moldboard when you're moving a lot of material from the shoulder to the center. You also need to compensate for your motor grader's side drift by leaning the tops of your front wheels in the direction in which you're casting material. As you reshape the surface, you need to get rid of potholes, ruts, and washboarding. Several things cause washboarding. Drivers create it when they brake and then accelerate aggressively at intersections and on hills. But other causes are poor quality surface gravel and lack of moisture in the gravel. And you could cause washboarding by running your motor grader too fast. So keep it down to about 3 to 5 miles per hour. As you use the motor grader, one key to reducing washboarding is to be sure you're blending the surface gravel as you move it. After reshaping a roadway or adding fresh gravel, it's best to compact the surface with a roller. That helps bind the stone and the fine material together, and that helps hold the surface in place. You can do a good job with several kinds of rollers. When compacting, it's important to have the right moisture content in the gravel so the material stays in place. After you've done your major reshaping in the spring, it's important to follow up with routine maintenance during the summer and fall. To keep the road in good condition, use a light trimming action to remove minor surface defects and at the same time move gravel that has accumulated on the shoulder back to the driving surface. Oh, and one last thought about using your motor grader. One thing it can't compensate for is weak subgrade soil. If that's what's causing surface problems, then you will have to improve the subgrade. And that can only be done by removing and replacing subgrade materials or by improving its performance in some other way. Okay, let's review the most important points about using a motor grader. First is safety for you and the public. Keep that in mind always. Next, make sure your motor grader is in good condition before you leave the shop. Go slow to avoid loping or bouncing. Pay close attention to both the angle and the pitch of your moldboard. Use articulation and wheel lean to maintain better control of the machine. Reshape the road in the spring by recovering gravel from the shoulder or ditch and moving it into the center to maintain the approximate 4% crown. Then maintain shape the rest of the year with light blading. Be sure you blend the material as you move it. That helps reduce washboarding, potholes, and rutting. And if possible, after shaping, compact the surface with a roller to keep the gravel in place. And speaking of gravel, the next section will show you what good gravel is and what it isn't.
So like Ken was talking about there in the movie, you know, the main things you need to think about is safety for yourself and the traveling population. Also making sure that your motor grader is in good operating condition and that you go slow whenever you're cutting your surface and you're moving that material. The other thing that you need to take and think about is making sure, you know, that the moisture is wet. Because, oops, let's see. Okay. Making sure that that moisture is wet so that you don't segregate that aggregate or that gravel as you're taking and moving it around. If you're taking and doing a real light grading, you know, you're going to take and probably do that as a dry activity. So if you're in an area that has a crust on that roadway, you don't really want to regrade that roadway because then you're going to break that crust up and you're going to create dust and also segregate your aggregate. So if you need to do some light grading, watch out for those areas that have crusted up and they're hard, because you don't want to break them up and open them up. You also need to take and understand that the shape of that roadway. You know, you want to take and make sure that you have a crown in that roadway, or a super elevated crown if you're going into a corner and coming out of that corner. But as far as driveways, you need to make sure that, you know, the driveway intimidators that we talked about last Tuesday, you know, that you don't have a hump or a bump because of that driveway. You want to be able to keep your roadway grade is your controlling factor. And then, you know, make sure you get rid of those bumps or those dips caused by those driveways. And then, of course, intersections, bridge approaches, railroad grade crossings, all those things you need to be able to flatten that grade out so that as you come through that intersection or you come to that railroad grade crossing or that bridge, you match that bridge approach or that grade of that railroad track, which is going to be flat. So you need to take and adjust your crown at those points. Also, gravel road depends on the quality of the material and the quantity. The reason I say the quantity as well is that you need to make sure that you have enough gravel road material so you're not digging down into the subgrade and contaminating that gravel road surface material that you've hauled in to take and create that driving surface. So you need to take and make sure that you have enough of that material there. And then, like Ken explained, is that those washboards, you know, that loose material, those excessive windrows are all issues that we see out on roadways that create hazards for that traveling population. So what I'd like to do is ask Victoria to go ahead and bring up the question. What is the crown of your gravel roadway that you currently have? And if you go ahead and answer down in the chat box, that'd be fantastic.
Yep, they can do that, or they can vote with the poll question on the screen. If they're having issues voting there, it's probably because they're in full screen mode and they just need to take it out of full screen mode. But we've got up options of 5%, 2%, 4%, or flat. And they are voting pretty quickly here, Bruce. So I'll hopefully have this closed down here in just a minute or two and can tell you what the end result is.
Excellent.
Now the folks in the question box, they are putting in, all three of them who responded there put in 4%. So, and then I'm going to shut the poll down now because we've got quite a few who voted. And I'll share the results with everyone. 14% chose 5%, 24% of the audience chose 2%, 55% of the audience chose 4%, and 6% of the audience chose flat. So I'm going to hide those poll results. There we go. And it's back to your screen now, Bruce. Thanks.
Thank you, Victoria. So, of course, what we had talked about earlier, actually last week, last Tuesday, we talked about the shape of that roadway, and that the crown of that roadway, we need to take and be at or very near that 4%. I have some agencies that'll say, oh yeah, well, we go up to 5%, and then as the crown gets beat down, then it gets back down to where the water will run off that roadway, because that's what we want that material to be able to do, is to be able to shed that moisture that drops down onto that roadway. The problem with having a steeper crown, say a 5% or a 6% crown, is that it puts too much pressure on the steering wheel of the driver as they're driving down that roadway. And so what they do is they jump on top of your crown. And that's the reason they beat it down. You ideally do not want that traveling population to be running on your crown. You want them to be running on their proper side of the roadway. And so like we talked about in the design of that gravel roadway, of making sure that you have the correct shape. And here on this screen, I've got, a drawing of kind of the correct shape of a gravel roadway. You have your subgrade, your natural material that you've taken and hopefully have been built up into a crown in the middle of the roadway of a 4% crown. And then you've came in and put your gravel road surface material on it, making sure that you have that 4% crown from the center line to the shoulder of the roadway, and then from the shoulder of the roadway going down off into the fore slope, that you're looking at a 4-to-1 type of slope, 4 foot of distance for every foot of fall, type of area down into the ditch, and the ditch is lower than your subgrade area. So those are all important things that you need to think about, making sure that you maintain that 4% crown, making sure that you maintain those shoulders so that that water, when it does hit that roadway, it's able to take and be shed by that roadway into your ditch, and that the ditch is able to drain that water away from that roadway so that you don't get that infiltration into your subgrade, making your subgrade starting to get soft. Those are some of the common issues and some of the common problems. Now, we talked about, as far as last Thursday, we were talking about our material, making sure that we have the best quality material that we can use for that gravel road surface. We talked about making sure that, when you're buying your material for your gravel road surface, that you have a specification, and that specification, you make sure that you have a gradation that has enough rock in it to be able to carry the load, enough sand in it to take and be able to help lock that rock together. And then, of course, binder, so that binder is able to take and hold that material together to keep that material from coming apart as cars travel back and forth down that roadway. So those are all the components that we've talked about over the last few days of this program. One of the things that we also talked about earlier in the design of the roadway is taking and having a slope meter or some other way of taking and making sure that you're achieving that 4% slope. In my number of years of operating a motor grader, the first, like I'd mentioned in the design portion of the course, when the first time I got into a motor grader, the operator that I was working with had actually taken and put a carpenter's level on the windshield frame. And then he'd mark the carpenter's level of where I wanted to take and be able to cut that roadway to be able to get the right shape that I wanted. Well, the slope meters are a handy tool. I've had a couple of agencies that they've actually gone in and purchased the automatics for the motor grader so that they can actually set those automatics to be able to cut that surface and be able to manage that surface correctly. So, whatever tool you're using, using your seat of your pants, which a lot of the older motor grader operators say, oh yeah, I can feel when it changes. Well, a lot of times you'll have a little bit of feel, and if you have those high spots and low spots in the roadway, then that traveling population is going to move to the center of the roadway, and that's not where you want them to drive. So making sure you have a slope meter or some sort of gauge to be able to judge and identify where those problems, those situations are occurring. I wanted to check with you real quickly, Victoria, if we had any questions coming up so far.
There's one, and you might have already answered it, but what should the shoulder slope be for a gravel road?
Yes, and if I can go back, I'll go back here. When you take a look at that ideal shoulder slope, you want it to be either 4-to-1 or flatter. Either going down, if for every foot you drop down, you go out 4 feet. That's a 4-to-1 slope, and you want that either to be 4-to-1 or flatter. The reason being is that if you get it into a 3-to-1 type of slope, when a car drops off that shoulder, they're going to drop to the bottom of the ditch. They won't be able to stop themselves. So you need to take and have that little flatter, a 4-to-1 slope or a 6-to-1 slope or something along those lines, so that when that car accidentally drops off that shoulder, that roadway, if they don't catch it, they'll travel down to the ditch, but they'll stay upright. Instead of on like a 2-to-1 slope, they'll actually roll over, which is a bad situation for the traveling population. So I hope that helps answer that question. Whoops. So when we're taking it and maintaining that roadway, we want to take and make sure that we cut to the bottom of the potholes, to the bottom of the corrugations, to the bottoms of the defects, and remix that material together when we're doing our major grading in the spring of the year. And we definitely want to take and have moisture in that roadway to be able to keep that material from segregating. Because you think about it, if you have your motor grader set up at a 35 to 45% slope, and you have the moldboard set at the right angle, you're taking and cutting that material up, and some of that material will be larger stone, and they'll leave holes. And because the moldboard and the action of the moldboard, all those little holes will get filled up with your binder unless you have moisture present, so that the binder, which is your clay, your other type of product, is going to stick to that rock and travel with that rock down to the end of the moldboard. Then when you're taking, you're reshaping that roadway, of course, you want to take and make sure you're putting that 4% crown back into the roadway. And when you're cutting, ideally you're able to compact that material you're cutting, and then as you lay it back out, you compact it again, is the ideal situation. So, there's a number of different ways that we take and compact that material, but you need to take and make sure that it's moist, it has moisture in it. You don't, you do it, you cut your road surface slow, and you don't segregate your material as you're taking and dealing with that material on the roadway. So we want to take and come in and have some sort of compactive measure. So you take a look at it, and here we've got a little project here where we've taken and we're reshaping the roadway. We take and have a single drum roller working on that roadway, doing the compaction, and that's normally what you'll see quite often. So compaction is important for every treatment that we do on an unpaved roadway, whether it's just regrading that gravel roadway. Your compaction will take and make that roadway last longer. It's going to take and push that material together to keep it so that the cars don't knock it loose and throw it off to the side of the roadway. Also, if you're going to do some sort of stabilization or dust palliative type of treatment, that compaction is very important to lock that material together, hold it together. And it's the cheapest application you can use to extend the life of that roadway is compaction. And making sure that you're using that right size roller for the right material and that you properly do your compaction. If you're using like the roller here in this picture, the Dynapack with a single drum, and you have vibration going on it, and you're running it at 7-8 miles an hour, you can actually create bumps in your roadway because of where your compaction is taking place in that roller. So you want to make sure that that roller as well is only running, 3, maybe 4 miles an hour at the very most when it's doing compaction, and it's using the vibration of that roller. Because if you run faster than that, you can actually put bumps in your roadway that of places where you have compacted material and uncompacted material. So you need to take and make sure that if you're using that type of roller, that you're taking and doing your compaction correctly. And compaction is very important on those roadways. So here's another type of roller, and what I'd like to do, I've got a little question here. So what type of compactor is this? And you have 4 choices there on your screen: a steel drum roller, a sheep foot roller, a pneumatic roller, or a grid roller.
And I've got that up for them. Folks are voting. I like how they're on these questions today, Bruce. Everybody seems to know exactly what their thoughts are on this. So I'll wait till I shut the poll down this time before I tell you what's in the question box, because I don't want to give the answer away by reading that off.
That sounds excellent. It's when technology is working well, it goes well.
Yes, knock on wood. We want to
Yes.
definitely get all the way through this one today. All right. Folks did a good job voting there. I'm going to close that poll up and share the results. I will tell you, in the question box, we had 3 people who responded. 2 chose sheepfoot, and the other one chose grid. And whoever just put ba in the question box, that was pretty funny. So on the percentage, we had 26% chose steel drum, 54% chose sheep's foot, 8% chose pneumatic, and 13% chose grid. So I'll hide those and let you tell them which one it really is.
Okay, I appreciate that, Victoria. This one is actually, it's a version of a sheep foot roller. Some people will actually take a look at it and say it's a grid, but generally speaking, a grid roller will be a static type of roller, where this one's it has a vibratory system in it. But the grid type of roller, generally speaking, they'll be static, and they'll have a open type of face to it, to where they can actually roll over rocks and break rocks and some of those types of items. So generally speaking, this is classified as a sheep foot roller. And this roller generally is only used on your subgrade, when you use compacting your natural type of material. The steel drum roller I showed you earlier, there's actually 2 versions of it. There's a single drum roller that I showed you in the picture If we go back here, this one's a single drum steel roller, and that's what you'll normally see a lot on the unpaved road surfaces. A double drum steel roller you'd see when you're doing compaction on asphalts. So generally speaking, on a unpaved roadway, you'll be using a single drum steel roller. The other type of roller that you see quite often on unpaved roadways is actually the pneumatic roller. Um, you may see it in as a roller itself, or you may actually see a pneumatic roller in what they call the pull behind types of rollers for graders. The where you can lift them up off of the back of the grader. They're attached to where your scarifier is, and you can pick it up and then set it back down onto the roadway and use the weight of the grader to take and aid in your compaction. Now we have taken, and in some cases, I've actually had agencies that come in and they use a loaded water truck. Um, any type of compaction is better than none at all. But by the same token, the issue that I see with a water truck is, generally speaking, you have to run that water truck up and down that roadway quite a number of times to really get a good compaction. And it's very difficult to also do your compaction when that motor grader is cutting that roadway with that water truck. And so I prefer to either to see an agency use what is called a rock and roll, where it's attached to the grader, the rollers are attached to the grader. You pick them up when you're turning around, but you can set them back on the ground when you're cutting, when you're taking and laying your material out. Those are an ideal situation, or an independent roller. Um, Now, in a number of different jobs that I've worked on for different counties here in the state of Idaho and around the United States, this is an ideal situation where you have a motor grader and it has a set of rock and rolls on it, so that the rock and rolls are able to take and they're able to put them on the ground, and when they're cutting or they're laying, they're able to do some compaction. They have a water truck here in this situation where they can keep the material moist, so you're not going to segregate your material. They have a secondary roller. It's a single drum roller, vibratory roller that they can take and run on the surface to compact that surface. And then, of course, they have a maintenance truck that so that they can have fuel, extra fuel, and other maintenance types of activities as they need them. And so this would be an ideal situation for any entity. Now, what happens sometimes is that, in the summer months or later on the year, after you've taken and reshaped your roadway and got it all shaped up, you'll start getting some complaints about maybe some potholes or some washboards or those types of things. And like I said earlier, if you look at that roadway and it has a good crust, the materials all still bound together and held together, I would be very resistant in taking a grader out there and grading it, because then you're going to break that crust up and you're going to fluff that material back up when you do that light grading. And all you're going to be doing is filling in the potholes and the washboards with the loose material, and it's going to take and destroy that surface to where it's going to create more dust and segregate your material even more. And so, if your roadway's out there and you're seeing it getting really rough and really difficult, in an ideal situation, come out here and come out and put a little water on it, and then cut it and recompact it and lay it back down. But I know, a lot of agencies will say, oh, well, we need to do a little light grading on it. Well, be careful with that light grading, because it can create you some real problems when you're out there doing that type of work. Now, as far as motor graders or unpaved roadways, if you take a look at in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which virtually every state is either has a manual that is in compliance with the MUTCD, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or like Idaho and a number of other states, we just adopt the MUTCD with some exceptions. And as we take a look at that, now let me ask you, I've got another polling question that I'd like to take and ask, and that is, who enforces the MUTCD? And if you go ahead and bring that up for us, that'd be fantastic.
There, they have choices from the State Department of Transportation, the state courts, no one, or OSHA. And I'm getting some responses in the question box, so I'll read those off after we close the poll down.
Okay.
It's interesting to see the responses come in, and I'm sure everybody will be interested to see this too when it comes up. So, and they're voting even quicker on this one than they did on the other two. That's good. All right. Looks like we're getting pretty maxed out on voting. I'm going to close the poll down and share the responses. In the question box, I'll say real quickly that we got 2 responses for DOT, or it's actually 3. We got 1 response for OSHA, 1 response for no one, and someone put in there all of the above. And then on the poll, we had 59% of those who participated chose the State Department of Transportation, 4% chose the state courts, 26% chose no one, and 11% chose OSHA. So I'm going to hide those results and I'll let you tell them what the answer is.
That sounds most excellent. Thank you, Victoria. Well, when you take a look at the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, it's over the years that I've taught the MUTCD course and the traffic control programs. One of the things I always tell people is that, over 90% of all the MUTCDs that are purchased by lawyers. And that kind of gives you an idea of, who's going to be doing the enforcement of the MUTCD. Generally speaking, when you look at it within the transportation, the DOT departments, if they have a project, if they have on a state roadway, or in some cases on a local roadway, they may have an inspector, and the inspector will go out and work with the contractor to make sure that the traffic control is set up and maintained correctly. But by the same token, if you have a major issue and you have an incident take place on that construction site, generally speaking, what will take place is it'll be a court action. Now, if you're a local jurisdiction and you're out there on your local roadways, and you have something take place, a lot of times that will be enforced by the court system as well. Now, OSHA over the years has been doing some enforcement as far as the MUTCD is concerned, but it's been kind of a spotty in places. But what you've got to understand is that OSHA, their primary concern is not the traveling population. Their primary concern is the worker for the contractor, depending upon whether you're a state-sponsored state or a federally sponsored OSHA state. OSHA is primarily concerned about the employee. So in those state-sponsored states where the state has taken over the authority of the OSHA organization, they can do inspections and they can do citations and all those activities, not only on the contractor, but also on the state and the local jurisdictions as far as employee safety concerns. Where if it's a federal OSHA state, like Idaho and a number of other states in the United States are, then the OSHA organization can only do inspections and citations for the contractors. The all the consultants and contractors that are working in the transportation system. The state DOT and the local jurisdictions are not inspectable or citable by OSHA. So it's kind of a little bit of a mixed bag. It was kind of a little bit of a difficult question, but by the same token, we do have people that are enforcing these laws and regulations. And gravel roads or unpaved roadways are one of the areas that a lot of agencies I've worked with over the years have sat there and they said, well, we don't feel that we have to put out any traffic control when we're out there working on that unpaved roadway because it's a mobile operation. Well, it is, except for it doesn't meet the classification of a mobile operation, because you've got to take a look at your activity area is from the point that you put your blade down and you change that road surface to the point that you pick your blade back up and that road surface changes back to the way it originally was. So generally speaking, if you're grading a mile or 2 miles a section of roadway, that mile or 2 miles is your work area. And you've got to take a look at that work area and make sure that you have that marked in accordance to the MUTCD. Now, one of the other things I just received notification of this morning is that the Federal Highway Administration is going through their review, and they're hoping to be able to update the 2009 Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, probably this fall or midwinter. Generally speaking, what they've done in the years past is they'll take and get it approved by Congress, the U.S. Congress, and then they'll take and release the document out to the states in December or first part of January. They definitely want to try and get it done before the elections, and so that they can, get it completed, and it's not held up because of the election process. So, nationally, an unpaved road, accounts for 1/3 of the federal and local transportation systems. These roadways typically serve, about less than 3,000 vehicles a day. Most unpaved roadways, you're looking at unpaved roadways in a, like I talked about in the management section of the unpaved roadway. I like to see an agency having a management plan for all their road system, their paved roadways, their unpaved roadways, their dirt roadways, and then as the number of vehicles increase on those types of roadways, then there may be a change in that roadway. As a unpaved roadway goes up and gets up over 200 vehicles a day, it gets to the point to where your maintenance costs are going to overrun your ability to be able to perform on that roadway. So you may need to pave it, or you may need to put in a stabilizer. You may need to do something else. But we do have some unpaved roadways that have 3,000 vehicles a day. And most of those are generally a stabilized type of roadway. And we'll talk about that. That's actually the last part of my segment that we'll have on Thursday, is taking a look at those stabilizers, those products that we're going to use. A lot of the unpaved roadways is in the central part of the United States. You get from the Appalachian Mountains, you come across through the Midwest into the Rocky Mountain states. You see a lot of unpaved roadways up in Alaska. I understand Simon's on the call today. You get up there and they have a lot of unpaved roadways. These are all low volume types of roadways, and they require a lot of maintenance. Generally, they're used by a wide range of vehicles. You may have automobiles and pickups, farm equipment, heavy equipment, mining equipment. Some of the heavier types of vehicles that we see on our unpaved roadways could be the oil production types of equipment, some of the mining types of equipment, some of the dairy type of equipment are all very heavy and do a lot of damage to those unpaved roadways. And speeds can be fairly high. Generally speaking, you see an unpaved roadway, and if it's a nice roadway and it has a good gravel surface, you might see speeds well over 55 miles an hour. And that creates problems in itself, as far as deterioration of the road and also creating problems in the roadway. So our unpaved roadways have a large variety of traffic, has a large variety of surface types, but the main thing that we need to take a look at is making sure that our surface of our roadway is going to be able to be maintained by that motor grader in a condition to where we're not segregating and creating problems in our roadway by segregating our aggregate or leaving berms in our roadway that people are going to have problems or situations with. So we looked at, as an organization, through federal highways, we took and looked at a number of different scenarios about that gravel roadway and what should that work zone traffic control look like. Now, in the MUTCD, this is generally the basic slide that you use for your traffic control concepts. Taking a look at, you have your advanced warning area. That's your area. You tell that traveling population what's coming up. And then on a paved roadway, you may have, some traffic control devices, and you may have, your taper, and you'll have other traffic control devices to guide the traveling population by you. But on an unpaved roadway, we don't generally, as an industry, use that many traffic control devices. And I'll tell you right now, in the MUTCD, unpaved roadway is only mentioned once in that entire manual, and that's under Part 5 in the introduction. And so when we took a look at what type of traffic control do we need for that unpaved roadway, we went to Minnesota, we went to a couple of different states that had information about unpaved roadways and what type of traffic control. And what we found, generally speaking, is what follows. Is that when maintaining an unpaved roadway, the organization needs to consider the width and the length of the work area, the visibility of the equipment and the berm. As you're cutting material off that roadway and you're taking it towards the center line of the roadway, how tall is that berm? Is that piece of equipment, that motor grader, that roller, that water truck, all those pieces of equipment, are they visible on that roadway? And that's one of the other things I find with, especially with the motor grader, if you only have a motor grader out on the roadway, as it's cutting that roadway and that traveling population comes down that piece of roadway that's been cut, it gets very dusty. And so people may not be able to see that motor grader. And so I'd like to have water for that visibility also. Control that dust that you have so you don't have an issue or a problem with that dust from those vehicles. So all that equipment out on that roadway, generally speaking, you'll have a roller that might be working out there, you'll have a grader working out there. All that equipment needs to have their flashing yellow lights on, need to have their hazard warning lights on, a slow vehicle moving sign, especially on the motor grader or the roller. If the roller's out there, you need to have those types of signs on those pieces of equipment. And you may need to take and put out a road work ahead sign. So when you look at some of the concerns, the direction of the equipment, we talked about that on last Tuesday, is that, if you continually pull your material in one direction, you're going to drag your material out and you're going to stretch it out, and it's going to cause you problems. So there may be some times that you have to work against the flow of traffic. So you need to take and make sure that traveling population is aware that you're out there, that your berm size is not a hazard, or if it is, you need to let them know that berm's out there. And the way that we do that is by putting out a roadwork ahead sign. So I tell a lot of people I work with is that as I'm taking and going out and starting to cut a section of roadway, I like to take and I drop a roadwork ahead sign off on the shoulder of the roadway just behind where I'm going to start cutting, cut the shoulder of the roadway, and when I get ready to turn around and make my other cut, I'll stop and put another roadwork ahead sign on the opposing traffic on the opposite side of the roadway. So you're protected by those two. You notify that traveling population that you're out there on that roadway. So an activity area for an unpaved roadway is located between the first point where the motor grader cuts the road surface or the road surface is changed to the point where the traffic is returned to the normal roadway before any modification or changes by that maintenance activity. And you think about going 3 to 4 miles an hour, cutting a gravel road surface, and you cut a mile of it, you're not going to be done with that section of roadway in 5 or 10 minutes. You're going to generally take, an hour or maybe a little longer, depending upon how much compaction and how much water and all the other things you're doing. So that activity area, you're doing a lot of things in that activity area. So you need to let that traveling population know you're out there. Even when you're light grading, your berm is generally small enough that it can be traversable by a vehicle that crosses that berm. But by the same token, you still need to take, and especially with light grading, and if you don't use water, you're going to have a lot more dust, and it's going to be harder to see your piece of equipment. So I recommend that you think about making sure that you put out roadwork signs and those types of signs whenever you're out there working on that roadway, dealing with that roadway surface. Now, of course, when you're reshaping a roadway and you're getting a major berm where it's going to cause major problems with the traveling population, you may actually, especially if you're set up on a grid system where every mile you have an intersection on your roadways, you may actually take a look at closing that segment of roadway that you're going to be taking and doing that major reshaping on. Or in some cases, you may actually decide to put out a flagger and control that traffic so that traffic slows down. They don't hit that berm doing 55, 60 miles an hour. They don't have those issues with that work area. And in those situations, if you're going to use a flagger or if you're going to close the roadway, you still need to do the traffic control that you would normally do with a flagging situation or a road closure. Set up a detour with a road closure, put up the signs letting the traveling population know that there's a flagger out there and they need to obey that flagger as that flagger is controlling that type of roadway. So those are all the things that you need to take and think about when you're out there on the roadway. Victoria, have we had any questions so far?
Yes, you've had one. It says, what's the best way to grade and spread gravel on a steep, unpaved road? How do they select the proper size of crushed rock and roll it so that it doesn't washboard?
Well, and that's actually a very good question. A grade, having a graded of roadway, it creates a lot of issues for the simple reason that you not only want to be able to shed the water into the ditch, but you also want to take and make sure that the water is not traveling down your roadway, because otherwise it's going to wash. And so the gradation or the aggregate size isn't so much a critical factor, but making sure that you have the right mix of, your rock, your sand, and your binder, because it's going to be your binder is what keeps your roadway from getting washboard, from having those types of issues. And like we talked about in our material section last Thursday, we talked about making sure that that binder has a good PI, has a good plasticity index to be able to lock that material together. Now, one of the biggest things that I think that I see that helps on a grade, an upgrade or a downgrade, both, is compaction. Locking those products, those materials together, making sure that they're bound together as tightly as possible, and then making sure that you get the water to drain off of that roadway so that it doesn't soften up that road surface, allowing that road surface to be segregated by the traveling population. And so hopefully that you know the size of the aggregate isn't as important as making sure that your aggregate has the right amount of rock, sand, and binder in it. That's the critical part of being able to keep that material together, not so much the size. Now, one of the things I did talk about in the materials portion of the class is that the size of the aggregate, how big is that rock, is actually determined by the size of the vehicles that you have traveling on that roadway. We actually had a roadway in Colorado. It's called the Owl Creek Road. It goes from Fort Collins, just north of Fort Collins, out of the road that comes out of Laramie, Wyoming, and cuts around Fort Collins. They had a lot of truck traffic on it, and the county actually ended up taking and using a large stone in that roadway because the truck traffic would just beat apart that smaller type of stone. And they were able to take and have a higher content of binder in it, a higher sand content to be able to hold that stone. But by the same token, when you're grading it, if you have a large stone, you've got to grade enough material to be able to bury that stone. So you ended up looking at, let's say you have a 3/4 inch size stone or a 1-inch stone. Let's say a 1-inch stone, and you're grading it. That means you've got to lay 2 inches of material down to be able to properly lay that 1-inch stone and get it compacted. If you try and lay it at 1-inch size, it's going to drag on you. It's going to create you problems in your roadway. And so you need to take and realize what size aggregate are you using, and then you're able to take and lay that material down properly. And hopefully that's answered your question as far as the aggregate size, but it's the traffic determines the aggregate size. The elevation change is determined to make sure that you have the right gradation, is what will improve that roadway for that elevation change. Now, we do have times that we take and we actually go out there and we take that roadway and we do a major rehabilitation on it. We take and we're maybe hauling material out onto that roadway and increase in the amount of aggregate that we have on that roadway, or we may be out there pulling the shoulders and the ditches and reshaping that entire roadway. In those types of situations, generally speaking, we'll take and close that roadway so that that traveling population doesn't come out and get mixed up with all the larger berms and the large pieces of equipment. And of course, in that situation, we need to set up a detour. So let's take a look at a couple of examples. This is actually in a drawing that we actually have a guide that's published by the American Road and Transportation Building Association, ARPA. You can contact, I think, Victoria, if I could ask real quick, do you have some of the gravel unpaved roadway guidance books there at your center?
I believe we do, and if they drop me an email, I'll be happy to make sure we get copies out to them if they're interested in it.
Yeah, because that was the guidance document that was developed as part of FHWA and ARPA's agreement to take a look at the unpaved road issues as far as works on traffic control. And so, as it says here, in a light grading situation, grading operations should be scheduled and completed during daylight hours and suspended in poor weather or visibility conditions. You want to make sure that you're able to be seen. And when grading, it's best to have moisture present. Talks about that. Talks about putting out just a road work ahead sign can be installed at the approach of each of the crossroads or streets. And when doing minor grading, with a berm less than 6 inches, the road work ahead sign can actually be removed, because what we found is that most vehicles will see the berm and see the grader mark, and they'll take and realize that the berm's there and it's traversable. Where if you're doing heavier type of work, that berm gets to where it's non-traversable, and that creates a real problem with it. Some of the requirements: the motor grader should be equipped with a flashing or rotating light in addition to the vehicle hazard lights. And the requirements on the flashing or rotating light should be visible for 360 degrees around the piece of equipment when viewed at a distance of 600 feet or greater. Motor grader needs to be equipped with the slow moving vehicle sign. And the motor grader blades, like it said in the movie, we can take the orange reflective flag or orange flags and put them in stake pockets out at the end of the moldboard to bring attention to the moldboard for the vehicles passing it, so they know where that end of that moldboard is, so they don't accidentally run into that moldboard. For a general reshaping of a surface where you have a larger type of berm, here's another set of conditions. They talk about, if you need to take and put out a flagger, you still need to have the road work ahead sign, the be prepared to stop sign, the flagger symbol sign are all required anytime you put a flagger, whether it's a paved road or an unpaved roadway. And then taking a look at if you're doing some work on that roadway that's going to create a issue, you may need to actually use cones just like you would on a normal paved roadway, because it is a roadway that's open for the traveling population. So we need to be sure that we put out our traffic control devices to warn that traveling population that there may be an issue or a problem. Reconstruction using a detour. Of course, this is a drawing that we use quite extensively for paved roads, and we need to do it the same thing for unpaved roadways. I've seen it happen a number of times where an organization will come out and they'll have an unpaved roadway and they say, oh, well, it's a low volume roadway, so we'll go ahead and close it and they can figure out how to get around it. Well, that creates problems for you. You need to inform that traveling population how to get around your detour, because if they don't know how to get around it, they're going to try and come through your work area, which will create problems for you. So when you take a look at your detours, you need to make sure that you inform that traveling population of all the different areas that they're going to be going through. So in recap of some of the things that I've been talking about, the movie talked about one, being slow when you're grading. I had a conversation with one operator and he says, oh yeah, he says, I can grade 18 to 20 miles a day. I asked him, I said, how often does your grader blade touch the ground? I said, 18 to 20 miles a day, you're not putting a crown in that roadway. You're taking and destroying that crown, and you're not taking and getting a smooth surface. Taking and getting those speeds down on those motor graders is very important. Making sure that you have moisture when you're cutting down into that roadway to get rid of those washboards, those potholes, those other dips. If it's a light grading situation that you're doing and you can't have water, don't grade something that already has a crust on it. Let that crust stay there, because if you break it up, you're going to take and have more problems with it. Make sure you have compaction, that compaction is going to take and hold that roadway together and not create some issues or some problems for you. Make sure that you know how to take and set your blade to properly cut that material and not segregate that material. And then once you lay it, compaction. Compaction will take and increase the life expectancy of your road immensely. And so making sure that you either have rock and roll compactors behind your motor grader, you maybe have a single steel drum, or you have pneumatic rollers. All those things can aid in the compaction of that roadway and preservation of that road. Any questions so far?
No additional questions right now.
Okay. So I'm a little ahead of myself, Victoria. Would like to go back. Let me come back here just a little ways. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this grader train that I've got here in this picture that I've came back to. This was actually a project that we're doing out in an area called Oakley here in Idaho. And you know, a lot of agencies have a real difficult time with water, being able to get access to water so that they can take and water their roadway. This is a farming community out in the desert part of Idaho, and virtually all the ground here that they're farming is all irrigated. And the highway district that owns these roadways out in this part of the country, what they've actually have been able to do is they've worked out an agreement with the farmers, since it's all irrigated by pressurized irrigation systems. They actually put in a stub where their water line goes close to the roadway so that the highway district can take and pull water up out of their pressurized irrigation system and be able to use water to take and grade their roadway. The benefit to the highway district is they're able to take and have the water to be able to grade with. The benefit to the landowner is that they're able to take and see their roadways lasting longer. So they see a real benefit in being able to provide that water to that highway district. The benefit works out really well for both of these organizations. And we're going to talk about it on Thursday quite extensively. This was a project that we were taking and getting ready for a stabilization type of activity. We actually used a mag chloride on this roadway to take and stabilize that roadway and be able to hold that material in place. So those are generally the points and the pieces of information that I wanted to share in this part of my presentation. Thursday
Bruce,
we have, yes.
sorry to interrupt. There is a question that just came in. Someone would like to know what mag chloride is.
Okay. Well, and that brings me right up to where I was going to go, is that on Thursday, the last part of this 4-part series, we're going to be talking about stabilizers. And in that conversation, we're going to be primarily looking at the different types of stabilizers. When you look at a stabilizer, there's well over 300 different name brands of stabilizers. But generally speaking, there's only 5 families that encompasses all 300 types of brands of stabilizer. And mag chloride is one of those types. It's actually a salt. You have sodium chloride, mag chloride, and calcium chloride are the 3 primary salts that are used in stabilization. And magnesium chloride is a combination of magnesium and then the chloride. And it's a a stabilizer because it's very hydroscopic. It'll attract water to itself. And so it's used pretty extensively, especially in areas around the Great Salt Lake. They use a lot of the stabilizers, the mag chloride type of stabilizers, because of the access to that cut type of chemical. So when you look at it, next Thursday, we're going to be talking about those stabilizers. What are the families? What are the requirements, or what should you look at when you have somebody approach you and say, hey, I've got a great product here and it's going to help you with your roadway. Does it really help you with the roadway, or is it just a waste product they're trying to get rid of? We've seen that happen a number of different times where we have a waste product that doesn't help our roadway, and in some cases actually creates problems in our roadway. And so you need to take, and if you're going to be using some stabilizers in that, you need to think about what type of stabilizer, what type of roadway do you have, and what type of maintenance do you want to do on that roadway. I was involved with one company that was using developed a stabilizer that they used up in Alaska on some of the remote types of runways to stabilize that runway. And you look at that chemical type of treatment, they were only going to be able to do it once and then expect it to last 20 or 30 years. And some of them work out really well and others maybe not so much. So what we're going to be talking about on Thursday is all about those stabilizers. So if you want more information about the stabilizers, what are the different families, what are the different, some of the brand names, we'll talk about that on Thursday.
Sounds great, Bruce. You know, I also want to mention, since we have a little bit of time here, that I'm a member of the Low Volume Roads Committee with TRB, and David does a great job with that committee. And I would recommend anybody who's on this webinar, if you have an interest in just keeping up with what's going on in this area, to just become a friend of that committee, that you that way can get emails to let you know what's happening in this subject matter area. I know when I went to TRB a few years ago, I was fascinated by one project. I believe it was up in Michigan, where they were taking the paper pulp byproduct from paper factories and using it to stabilize the low volume roads. And I thought that that was a great project that they were working on. So it really gives you some good ideas. I'll send the name of that committee and how to become a friend of that committee out to everybody who's on the webinar today. I had that question come in there.
Okay.
So the question box. The other thing I wanted to mention is a lot of our gravel roads are over in the area of the state here in Ohio that a few years ago saw a lot of heightened traffic from the shale gas industry. And a number of our jurisdictions looked at using RUMAs, road user maintenance agreements, to get on the front side of the roadway repairs that were going to need to happen for the heavier loads to be able to use the roadways. Have you seen very much of that going on in the West? I know like North Dakota has a lot of, you know, shale gas traffic, or have you seen that in other areas? And if so, Bruce, you know, what are the types of things that, you know, the local agencies look at getting into those agreements to help strengthen the roadway for the heavier truck traffic?
Well, I know that, you know, I do quite a bit of work up in North Dakota, and some of the North Dakota areas where they have the fracked shell type of nat or of oil that they're taking and is extracting, you know, their roadways. A lot of those agencies, you know, some of them were able to take and get an agreement, a maintenance agreement, as far as taking care of those roadways. They created, I think up in the Stanley area. I know Denise would be more aware of this, Denise Brown up in North Dakota, but I believe they took and actually created a little bit of a tax to be able to take and pull some of the funds so that they can maintain those roads into those wells. Now, here in Idaho, we've ran into a real big issue as far as the wind turbines, because the wind turbines are such a large device. Just the hauling in the blades and hauling in the stanchion for those wind turbines. Most of our gravel roads were not built large enough or wide enough, and so they had to come up with an agreement to be able to widen out some of those roadways, and then also look at the corners, so they'd be able to actually make the corners getting into the areas that they're going to install these big wind turbines. And by having that agreement, it saved the county from having to go in and do the upgrades and the maintenance of those roadways. And so, if you're a local jurisdiction and you're looking at some of those heavy truck traffic, I know the oil fields, even the dairies. The dairies beat up those county roads pretty heavily because they have so much weight because of that milk that they end up hauling. Or the oil industry, all the oil trucks going to the different wells and picking up the oil, cause a lot of maintenance headaches. I know in Nevada, they have a mine in just outside of Elko, Nevada, that the county has an agreement with that mine where they provide a motor grader and an operator, and then the mine provides a motor grader and an operator to maintain their roadway going into that mine, trying to reduce some of the maintenance costs on their personnel carriers and all their other equipment that run on that roadway. And so there's a number of different types of agreements, but you need to work those out in advance. If you hear of some sort of industry that's coming into your area and you're concerned about, what's going to be the impact of that roadway, you need to take and work with your planning and zoning organization, work with your county commissioners to get an impact agreement with that organization, because otherwise you're going to be boring the cost of that extra maintenance and that extra work. And so, yeah, I've seen it happen in a number of different types of jurisdictions, and there's a lot of different types of agreements. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up, Victoria.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I didn't realize it was so widespread across the country. So I'm glad to hear that people are being proactive, because we definitely, have to make these tax dollars stretch as far as we possibly can. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, if there's no other questions from our audience right now, we are going to go ahead and end a few minutes early today. So, but we'll be back on Thursday. So we will look forward to having you all back on here. And Bruce, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to having you on for our final session on Thursday. So everybody stay safe and take care until then. We'll see you then.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and thank you for everybody that attended. I really enjoy doing these sessions.
Thanks. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.